You don't remember your first breath, but the Bureau does. It's logged, time-stamped, archived in a server 200 feet below Quantico in a room that doesn't officially exist. Your mother tells you later, much later when the truth stops being something they can hide, that the delivery room was cleared like a crime scene. 4 agents per elevator bank, hallways emptied. The obstetrician passed a polygraph just to enter the room. Your father didn't pace in a waiting room. He coordinated. You were born under an alias into a life that was classified before you could even cry. And when you did cry, it wasn't celebrated with balloons or a song on the radio. It was noted in a report. Subject viable. Status secure. You didn't choose this, but the moment your heart started beating, the Bureau chose you. And somewhere in your young mind, even before you had words for it, a question began forming, one that would never leave you alone. If your entire existence was a security protocol, were you ever really a person at all? Childhood wasn't about playing in the yard, it was about learning which parts of the yard had sensors. Your house looked normal from the street. 2-story colonial white shutters, a mailbox with a name that wasn't really yours, but you knew better. The birdhouse by the oak tree had a camera. The windows in your bedroom were 3 inches thick. When you asked your mom why, she said it was for insulation. You were 7. You already knew she was lying, and that's when the first fracture appeared. In your understanding of right and wrong, in your understanding of the people who were supposed to teach you both. Your father insisted that lying was wrong, that integrity was everything, that the Bureau stood for truth, but your entire life was a lie. Your name, your address, your mother's smile when she said for insulation. You wanted to be angry, but you couldn't be because you understood, even at 7 years old, that these lies kept you alive. So you learned to live in the gap between what was right and what was necessary. You learned to hold 2 completely contradictory truths in your chest at the same time and breathe normally. That's not something children should have to learn, but you did. And once you learned it, you could never unlearn it. You had tutors instead of classmates. You weren't allowed friends from the neighborhood. The few kids you did meet were sons and daughters of other agents, and even they looked at you differently. You could see it, the fear, the awe, the careful distance. You wanted to ride bikes to the gas station and buy candy with crumpled dollar bills. You wanted to exist without being a case file, but normal wasn't available to you. Normal was a security risk. What no one prepared you for was the resentment, not of your father, not of the Bureau, but of the people your father was protecting, the ordinary families who sent their kids to public school without a second thought, who didn't know what was out there, who would never know your father's name, never say thank you, never understand what was being held back from them so that they could live their uncomplicated lives. Your father gave everything, and they got to be blissfully ignorant of the cost. You hated yourself for feeling that, but you felt it anyway. Your first real memory of your father isn't his face. It's the shape of a sidearm under his blazer. You were maybe 5, sitting on the kitchen floor playing with toy cars. He bent down to pick you up, and that's when you saw it. The hard, angular bulge pressed against his ribs. You touched it without thinking. He froze, not angry, just completely still, like you'd reached into somewhere you were never supposed to. He moved your hand away gently and said, "That's just part of the uniform, buddy." But the look in his eyes wasn't reassurance. It was a warning, the kind that lives in the body long after the moment is gone. He loved you. You always knew that, but there was something else underneath the love, something unreachable. He disappeared for weeks at a time, and when he came back, he smelled like airports and burnt coffee and something metallic you couldn't name but somehow always recognized. When you were 9, you asked him what he really did. He looked at you for a long time, then, "I make sure bad people can't hurt good people." You asked if he ever got hurt. He didn't answer. He just walked into his office, the one with the soundproof door and the fingerprint lock, and closed it behind him. That night, through the walls, you heard him on a secure line. His voice was low and clipped and completely controlled. You couldn't make out the words, but you heard 2 of them clearly enough to stop your blood. Acceptable losses. You didn't sleep that night. You lay in your bulletproof bedroom and turned those words over and over. Who decides what's acceptable? Who decides which losses count and which ones are just the cost of doing business? Was your childhood an acceptable loss? Was your mother's perpetual low-grade anxiety? Was the fact that you'd never once fallen asleep in a house that didn't have cameras? Were you? By 14, the contradictions had grown so large you could barely breathe around them. Your father insisted you study law, ethics, advanced mathematics. You need to be smarter than the people I chase, he'd say. He hired professors from Georgetown, retired federal prosecutors, to tutor you in things most kids didn't encounter until law school. You were grateful. You were also being slowly suffocated, because the more you learned about the law, the more clearly you saw how often your father operated in the gray spaces around it. Technically legal, defensible in court, but ethically, you weren't so sure. And the gap between legal and ethical, once you see it, it's impossible to unsee. You remember one case specifically. He came home after 3 months undercover. You overheard him on a secure line, justifying what he'd done. He'd befriended a target, spent months earning his trust, attended his daughter's 8th birthday party, brought a gift, made her laugh, and then arrested her father in front of her. He was moving enough fentanyl to kill thousands, your father said later. One child's trauma against thousands of deaths is not even a question, but you watched his face when he said it, and it was a question. It was tearing him apart from the inside. You realized then what this job actually was. Not glory, not heroism, not the clean moral architecture of good versus evil. It was carrying the weight of necessary evils until you could no longer feel where necessity ended and evil began. That same year, you met the man your father called the handler. No tactical vest, no hard eyes, just a thin man with permanent dark circles and a laptop Velcro strapped to his wrists. Your father treated him with more quiet deference than any SWAT commander. I'm the man who makes your father invisible, he told you. I create shell companies that look real. Identities with credit histories, tax returns, social media footprints going back years. I make people who never existed, and I erase people who did. Your dad's the hunter. I'm the architect of the lie. You asked him once, when your father wasn't in the room, doesn't it bother you building fake lives? He looked at you with those exhausted eyes and said, every single day, I've created hundreds of identities, given them families, histories, the texture of real human lives, and then I delete them. I think about the ghost people, who they might have been if they were real, but then I think about the operations they enabled, the trafficking rings dismantled, the attacks that never happened, and I tell myself it was worth it. He paused, looked at his hands. But some nights, I wonder if I've told so many lies I've forgotten what truth feels like. You were 14, and you understood exactly what he meant, because you'd been lying about who you were for so long that you genuinely couldn't tell anymore if there was a real you underneath, or if the real you had been replaced so thoroughly by the cover that it no longer existed. At 16, they gave you a car, armored SUV, reinforced doors, bulletproof glass, run-flat tires. Your father handed over the keys along with a satellite phone with one preset number. The car is for mobility, he said. The phone is so you can reach me before the situation reaches you. You never told him how much you hated that car, how every time you drove it, you felt like you were inside a moving coffin. Other kids your age were discovering independence, the exhilarating, terrifying freedom of going somewhere no one knew where you were. You were discovering that you would never go anywhere no one knew where you were. That freedom, real freedom, spontaneous, uncatalogued freedom, wasn't something your life had room for. And what ate at you, what really festered, was the knowledge that people had died for less protection than you had. Informants, undercover agents, witnesses who saw the wrong thing at the wrong moment. They had nothing. You had a fortress on wheels and a rotating team and a father whose reputation alone was a deterrent. And you'd done absolutely nothing to earn any of it except be born. The guilt wasn't occasional. It was a permanent weather system you lived inside. Your teenage years blurred together together, a sequence of private schools attended for a semester at a time before a credible threat required a move. Your mother, packing your life into boxes again with that smile that never quite reached her eyes, a penthouse in DC 1 month, a nondescript condo in Arlington the next, agents rotating shifts in the lobby like furniture that breathed. You had everything: comfort, safety, access to power most adults never brush against, and you had nothing, nothing real, nothing yours. And then, at 17, you made a friend. His name was Marcus. He thought your name was Joel. For 3 months, he was the only thing in your life that felt genuine, genuinely warm, genuinely chosen, genuinely yours. You met at a coffee shop and talked about music and movies and completely, gloriously mundane things, and for the first time in memory, you laughed without calculating whether the laugh was appropriate. You just existed. Two people sitting across from each other with no agenda, no protocol, no layer of glass between you and the world. It felt embarrassingly like oxygen. Then one afternoon you saw the file on your father's desk: Marcus Williams. Background investigation, level 3. They'd gone through his entire life, his family, his search history, his text messages. You stood there reading it and felt something cold flood through you. Not anger, not even surprise, just the familiar, sickening sensation of a door closing. You stopped answering Marcus's texts. He sent confused, then worried messages. Did I do something wrong? Each one sat in your chest like an accusation you couldn't answer, you couldn't explain, so you said nothing. And the silence grew between you like scar tissue, protective, permanent, and proof that something had been hurt. You sat for weeks with a question that wouldn't stop. Did your father do this to protect you or to control you, to keep you isolated and dependent, contained within the system he'd built around you like a second skin? You wanted to believe it was love, but it felt like architecture. Your father was 55, but he looked 70. 5 assassination attempts, decades of sustained paranoia. He didn't sleep anymore. You'd find him at 3 in the morning in his office, surveillance feeds glowing across his face, cold coffee in his hand, his other hand resting on his sidearm like it had grown there. He looked in those moments less like a person than like a post, something that had been driven into the ground so long it had stopped being separate from the earth around it. You asked him the question you'd been storing for years. Was it worth it? He didn't answer right away. He looked at his hands, weathered, faintly trembling, mapped with small scars whose stories you'd never been told. And for a moment, his face did something you hadn't seen it do in years. It cracked just slightly, just enough to see what was underneath. I've saved thousands of lives, he finally said, prevented attacks, dismantled networks that would have caused suffering you can't imagine. But I lost my son's childhood. I lost my wife's peace. I lost parts of myself I'm never getting back. Things that went quietly, without warning, without me even noticing they were gone until I reached for them one day and found nothing there. His eyes found yours, and in them you saw something you'd spent your whole life trying to identify. That unreachable thing underneath the love. Now you recognized it. It was mourning, continuous, private, unending mourning for a version of his life he'd chosen to sacrifice and spent every day since wondering if the choice had been worth it. Was it worth it? I don't know. I genuinely don't know, because I can't see the other timeline. Maybe in that world, a bomb goes off and hundreds of people die in the rubble of something ordinary. A train station, a school. Or maybe you got to be a normal kid and I got to be a normal father and nothing catastrophic happened because someone else held the line. I'll never know. And that not knowing, that living with the permanent impossibility of knowing, that's the price. That's what it actually costs. You sat with that for a long time. The room felt very still, and you realized he hadn't just answered your question. He'd handed you his. The same question, the same weight, the same permanent impossibility passed from his hands to yours across the silence like the only inheritance he had left to give. It wasn't a job he was describing. It was a sentence. Generational, self-replicating, passed from hand to hand like a stone too heavy to put down but too familiar to release. And you were next. part of you wanted to walk away, to shed the name and the history and the security detail and disappear into the texture of ordinary life, to become someone who sat in coffee shops without cataloging exits, someone who could meet a person and simply like them without a background check running quietly in the back of your mind like a second heartbeat. But another part, the part that had been trained since before you had language, the part that understood in your bones what was out there, what your father had spent his life holding back from the world, that part knew the truth. If you walked away, someone else would take your place, someone with less preparation, less capacity to hold the weight without breaking. And the most terrifying discovery wasn't that you resented being built for this, it was that you were good at it. That somewhere in the process of being shaped into a weapon, you had also become something that worked, that fit, that belonged, not in the world maybe, but in the purpose. And the belonging felt like a betrayal of every version of yourself that had ever wanted something different, but it also felt, in a way that sickened and steadied you in equal measure, like the truth. There are no clean endings here, no resolution that makes the accounting balance. If you join, you validate everything. You confirm that the stolen childhood was necessary, that Marcus's unanswered texts were a reasonable cost, that your father's broken hands and sleepless nights and the quiet parts of himself he'd lost without noticing. It's that all of it added up to something that justified the sum. You become the proof that it was worth it. You carry that proof for the rest of your life in every choice you make that mirrors his. But if you walk away, then what was any of it for? You exist in records that will outlast you, but you don't exist in the world in any way that feels real. You have a name, but it's not the one people know you by. You are the son of a legend, raised in a palace that is also a prison, protected and completely in every way that matters alone. If you had the key, would you even use it? Or have you been in the cage so long that freedom would destroy you? Not whether you can leave, but whether the leaving would leave anything behind worth the name of a life. Whether the person who walked out would be a person at all, or just a protocol with nowhere left to run, because you don't stay because you have to. That's the cruelest part, the part that keeps you awake in ways that threat assessments never could. You stay because you don't know how to be anything else. The cage is all you've ever had. It is, in every sense that matters, home. And the realization of that, quiet, total, irreversible, lands in you not with the force of a revelation, but with the weight of something you have always, somewhere beneath the noise, already known. Because the threat was never out there. It was always this moment, this choice, the one you're going to make and the one you already know you're going to make, and the one somewhere in the part of you that has been building toward this since before you could cry, that you've always known you were going to make. You are a prisoner of a name that represents justice and costs you everything.